Welcome back, everybody. So today we're going to be continuing on with ancient Greece, and we're going to be looking at the Archaic Age, which stretches roughly from 8 to 500 BC. Our focus is going to be on the following. How did the economy change during this period? How did warfare evolve? Did it, meaning warfare, have any connection to economic, social, or political developments? Hint, it did. Sparta and Athens both went through important political developments. How was it related to their unique economic and social developments? Okay, so let's take a look and jump right in. The first thing that we need to recognize with the Archaic Age is important developments in the economy. Oftentimes, the economy drives other developments. The important thing to recognize is that the economy comes roaring back. You may remember that during the Dark Ages, the economy had taken a severe hit. There was depopulation, people were poor, there were less of them, things were bad. Well, the Archaic Age sees a rebound. This is partly driven by economic developments in technologies like iron. You may remember we've talked about iron and how important it was, not only for warfare, but particularly for tools. So the Greeks acquired iron technology and made use of it like other people did. They cleared out some of the forests, steel-tipped plows, agricultural productivity increased, and there's a subsequent growth in population as well. Something like 6 to 7 times most likely. And they know this based on burial sites and various archaeological aspects. And so, yeah, we see people are living in bigger houses, they're living better. There's more signs of metal and pottery and all of those things. So good times in that regard, the Archaic Age. Well, one of the problems with all this population growth, though, is we mentioned Greece has really poor soil. And so it's great to have more people, but when we start to get too many of them, we have problems. And so the Greeks came up with a unique solution to this: colonization. No, we shouldn't think of colonization in maybe the modern sense of going to, Africa and carving it up. Not quite like that. Greek colonization occurred mostly because of mostly because of a lack of food and agricultural land. And so what would typically happen is once a community got too overpopulated, they would round up some members, either voluntarily or sometimes non-voluntarily, have a lottery of sorts, and if your number was chosen, you were selected to go somewhere else. Now, at first, the Greeks focused on the islands of the Aegean, which is this area right here. Let me get a different color so we can see it. The islands of the Aegean right there. Later on, the coast of Asia Minor. Remember, they always like to stay near the coast, the Greeks. Later on, they began to settle in southern Italy over here, and even in parts of southern France and Spain, parts of North Africa, and especially up around the Black Sea. And so the Greeks spread out to all these new places, and many of these places were quite different from Greece. They had different natural resources and different potentials. And this really okay. One of the things we have to understand about early Greece is the formation of the polis. Now, a polis is simply just a city-state. Now, last time I mentioned that the Greeks had settled into tribal areas. One of the areas I mentioned was Attica, right over here. And this is what I want to focus on to talk about this process called Senoecism, which I think is kind of how it's pronounced. Attica would have been made up originally of dozens of little villages, each with their own leaders and really their own life. And they would have shared nothing except Attic identity, all right, as a tribe. But what begins to happen all over Greece, not just in Attica, but in many other places, is consolidation around a center. All right. Now, you might remember that a city-state, a polis, is just a independent state, governing state, and its surrounding countryside. And so what happened through Senoecism is that these villages that made up Attica began to coalesce around the city of Athens. All right, so all the little hamlets, the towns, the villages, they all recognized Athens as their center. And the same thing would happen other places. The region of Laconia, for instance, Sparta is going to become the dominant one. We talked about Boeotia last time. Thebes would be the dominant city-state. All right, so all these tribal groups began to form into city-states. Now, the government of these early city-states would have been aristocracies, ruled by the aristoi, that is. All right, remember, anytime you see that word cresci, it's ruled by whatever comes before it. In this case, it's the aristoi. In the course of the Archaic Age, the office of king gradually died out in most city-states, not all, but most. And instead, the aristoi from the surrounding villages and towns, who now settled more or less in the capital city, like Athens, for instance, they would divide the important administrative posts amongst themselves. So maybe someone's going to do the military, another person's going to handle judicial functions, another person is going to be the religious leader or the chief administrator, and maybe one will be like a chief administrator. Okay? And so you have these different offices, call them magistrates if you will, and the aristoi would divide these amongst themselves. Now, you didn't get to be the chief military officer, for instance, for life. Usually your term would only last for 1 year. Why did they only have it for 1 year? Well, part of it is they wanted to make sure that nobody got too powerful. It would be dangerous to leave people in office for too long, so you only got 1 year. And the idea was to spread the honors around so that everybody could have a turn holding these offices. Remember, these are big egos, the aristoi. Now, in addition to these individuals, magistrates who did day-to-day running of business, there was also a council of elders. And the council of elders was really, really important. And it was important because the council of elders made laws. So the laws that were going to govern the city were made by the council of elders. And they had the real power. They had the real power because they determined who could be in the council of elders. So if you wanted to be accepted in, you wouldn't want to mess with them too much. Because once you held administrative office, say you were in charge of the military or religious duties for your year, what happens once your year is up? Well, if they liked you, the council of elders would accept you in as one of their own. Okay? And so if you were the judge for that year, you probably wouldn't want to run afoul of the council of elders for that reason. Now, in addition to this, you may say, well, if that's what the aristocrats were doing, what about everybody else? Well, everybody else, as long as you were an adult male citizen of your region, say Attica, for instance, you could be part of the assembly. Now, it's important to emphasize, in the early polis, the assembly didn't do very much. The Aristoi didn't really feel obligated to call it very often, and the assembly had no real power. And so this form of government, this is an important word you may want to know, is called an oligarchy. And I'll see if I can type this out here. An oligarchy. No, I can't. Yes, I can. No, I can't. I'll write it on the screen. An oligarchy. Now, you know the archy part. That means rule by. And an oligos in Greek means rule by the few. And so this was maybe more technically an aristocratic oligarchy. All right? It was ruled by the few, and the few here are aristocrats, people of good birth and fame. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about the early polis, it's important to talk about changes in warfare and some of the social change that this leads to. One of the big problems, as I've mentioned, in early Greece is land hunger. There's just too many people for the land. And this eventually began to lead to border wars among some of the different regions of Greece. So, for instance, the region of Attica might fight with Boeotia, which was right next door to them. And this, became a bit of a problem, or maybe they would fight over trade routes or something like that. And it became very important to be able to defend your territory. Now that there were these individual states, they began to fight with each other. All right? If you lose too much territory, then your people are going to starve. If you gain some territory, you can get more farmland and things will be a lot easier for you. Now, we've seen border raiding before in Greece. But earlier, it was basically the Aristoi who would do it, and they were doing it to seize a couple of cattle or slaves so that they could give them away as gifts and be elite. But this is very different. In this process, what we're trying to do is we're trying to do territorial expansion. All right? We're trying to hold territory, and this is a whole different ballgame. If you think about it, if you're just doing a raid, the skills you want to have are stealth. You want to be quick. You want to be fast. You want to be as much like a ninja as possible because you want to get in and get out before people realize what's happening. But if we're trying to hold land, we need a lot of people. We need foot soldiers. We need infantry so that we can hold our land and basically say, no, this is ours and you can't come any further. And this leads to some important developments. One of the developments that we see is the rise of the hoplite. And a hoplite is a type of soldier that develops in the Archaic Age and is really the dominant form throughout Greek history. What's a hoplite? What makes a hoplite? Well, there's a couple of things. The most important part of being a hoplite is having heavy armor. As you can see here, this guy has a breastplate, a very heavy breastplate. He has greaves, like shin guards, a very heavy helmet, and a thrusting spear. These aren't going to be thrown. These are going to be used to thrust with. And maybe most importantly, there is a shield. And the shield is going to be very important to the hoplite, as we'll see in a second. All in all, the hoplite has about 70 pounds of armor on. And really, his mobility is very limited. He can't see very well, just out in front of him, can't see to the side, can't hear very well because of this helmet. And so he's actually quite vulnerable on his own. Now, I should mention, and it's important to know, that this requires quite a bit of money to be a hoplite. And back in these days, in order to be able to afford this type of weapon, it's not like today where they give you your equipment. You had to be rich enough to own this. And so hoplites had to be at least middle class to be able to afford this type of weapon. But it was very prestigious to own this. Now, as I said, these folks were pretty vulnerable on their own. And so it required a tactical innovation. Tactics, the way you fight, right? And so the tactical innovation that was required was called the Phalanx. And I'll see if I can write that on the screen. A phalanx. I think I spelled that right. Yeah, I did. A phalanx. This is the tactical innovation. Basically what a phalanx is when a group of warriors fight side by side together. All right? In very close formation. And the idea is that half of your shield covers your body, and half of your shield covers the person on the side of you. All right? Meanwhile, the person to your right covers the other half of you. And there are also going to be people in the background, and the people in the background aren't just sitting there waiting for their turn. They're going to be pushing the phalanx forward. And so when this all works together, it's a very effective formation. It's almost impossible to go through. And when phalanxes fight each other, they will crash into each other and try to keep stabbing each other and try to bulldoze the other party. It's a very effective formation, especially fighting against non-phalanxes. Now, the important thing to remember is that your body is you really have to depend on the person on the side of you to protect your body, because half of your body is exposed and you need this other individual there. And so you have to develop a really close relationship with your comrades. In order for this all to work, everybody has to have courage, because if the guy on the side of you runs, then you're left exposed, and and you're very vulnerable. And so working together, cohesion, teamwork became very important. You'd spend years and years of your life training with these people. And so you develop this intense social relationship. Now, it's important to remember, unlike previous forms of fighting, like think in the Dark Ages, it was really all about your individual ability, how skilled the aristocrat was in fighting. During this, in the Phalanx, in the Archaic Age, it really wasn't about you, it was about the team. And so distinctions between rank really disappeared in the Phalanx. If the guy on the side of you was a commoner and you were an aristocrat, it didn't really matter. It wasn't about you. And so this is an important point. You can make a note, put a star in your notes. The Phalanx was socially revolutionary. It really destroyed social distinction, right? It was a great leveler. Everybody was the same in the Phalanx. Now, even though maybe at this stage aristocrats were politically dominant and had more money, but on the battlefield everybody was the same, right? As long as you were fighting in the Phalanx unit. And we'll see that this is going to have important implications going forward. Okay. So hopefully we understand a little bit about this fighting formation, because it really is key to understanding so much in Greece at this time.